Welcome back. This is lesson 16 in our series on learning Python for beginners. In this lesson, you'll learn about a second type of loop called a condition-controlled loop. In this lesson, we'll recap quickly what we've learned about counter loops. You'll learn about a new type of loop called a while loop. You'll learn the essential features of any program that uses a while loop, and you'll get the opportunity to practice your skills. So let's briefly recap how for loops work. Like all structures in Python, a for loop has a header and a body. The body can include multiple commands. In this example, it's just one command. The header begins with the word for, then a counter variable, which we generally call I, and then a statement of the range for the counter to go through. So in this example, from 0, the default value 0, up to the stop value 6, stopping 1 before the stop value. We can make our program more complicated, add calculations, use the counter variable in calculations, and we could have as many lines as we wanted inside our loop. The alternative to a counter-controlled loop is called a condition-controlled loop. In Python, the key word for a condition-controlled loop is while. The header of a condition-controlled loop includes a logical test. Remember, we also call those Boolean expressions, and they can have the value true or false. The commands inside the body of the loop will be repeated while the test is true. So every time round the loop, the computer will evaluate the logical test again. As long as the test is true, the loop will continue. But when the test becomes false, the loop will stop. So let's have a look at an example of that in action. So here is an example of a while loop. The header of the while loop includes a logical test, also called a Boolean expression, with the value true or false. Like most logical tests or Boolean expressions, it compares two values. In this case, it compares a variable called stop with a string which is a capital N, and the comparison is equals. So as long as the variable called stop has the value n, the loop will continue. Before the loop begins, we've set the value of stop to n. That means that the loop is guaranteed to run at least once. And then inside the loop, we're giving the user the opportunity to change the value of the variable. That means it's possible to stop the loop. And what will stop the loop is typing anything other than n, because it's only while the variable holds the capital N that the loop will continue. So let's recap. A while loop, or any condition-controlled loop, begins with a header that has a test in it, a logical test. That test should include a variable, so it's possible for the value of the test to change. You need to give that variable a value before the loop begins, or the test won't work. And you need to give the user an opportunity to change the value of the variable inside the loop, or they won't be able to stop the loop. So here's an example of a program that uses a conditional loop. Before the loop begins, we've gathered the initial value of the variable. In this case, we've asked the user a maths question and we've converted their answer into an integer. The test in the loop checks whether the answer matches the value 60, which is obviously the right answer to the question. The loop will repeat if the answer does not match. Notice that if the user gets the answer right first time, the loop will never occur at all. That's a feature of a while loop. If the test fails the first time round, the commands inside the loop won't be carried out even once. And finally, you'll see the third feature that I said was essential for a while loop. We're giving them an opportunity to break out of the loop. In this case, if they can get the answer right, then the loop will stop. And following the loop, we've got a message telling them that they'd finally got the answer right. Sometimes we want to count how many loops, how many times the loop repeats. In this example, we can use a counter variable, just like we did with the counter-controlled loop. But remember, this time the counter doesn't control the loop, it just counts how many times the loop has repeated. So let's have a look at this example. We've set a password to an empty string and we've set a counter to 0. The loop will repeat as long as the password is not Pluto. With this example program, we can guarantee that the password is not Pluto to begin with. We've set it to an empty string, so the commands inside the loop will happen at least once. Inside the loop, we give the user the opportunity to exit from the loop. We're giving them the chance to enter the right password, and we're also incrementing the counter. In a counter-controlled loop, we don't need to do that. The increment happens automatically. But in a while loop, if we want to count up, we've got to include a command like that increments the counter. And of course, at the bottom of the loop, we're outputting the final result of how many goes it took for them to get the right password. So let's recap. A while loop is controlled by a logical test, and it will repeat so long as the test is true. The test will include a variable, and we need to set a value for the variable before the loop begins. We need to also change that value inside the loop, otherwise it will be impossible for the loop to stop. And at the bottom of the program, after the loop is finished, we can output our final values. So let's try some examples. Write a password program as shown here and count how many tries it takes for the user to get the password right. Write a program that classifies numbers as odd and even, odd or even, just like you did before, but this time use a while loop and continue to classify numbers until the user enters the number 0. And adapt that program so that the program counts how many odd numbers there are and how many even numbers there are and outputs those values at the bottom of the program. So that should give you some practice in using while loops, and in the next presentation we'll look at some more complicated uses of our loop structures.